Good evening, distinguished members of the panel and participants. On behalf of the Hindu Education Plus, I extend a warm welcome to all of you for today's webinar on an important and futuristic topic, Vision 2035, Overcoming Limitations and Supporting Change in the Indian Education Ecosystem. As we can see around us, the current social environment, the generational differences, the technological changes, and the new student profiles are driving the need to reinvent and redesign our higher education system. The new Education Policy 2020 is all set to revolutionize India's education landscape. While the ongoing pandemic has compellingly drawn us into a new learning with technology, we also need to ensure that in the next 15 to 20 years, we have a competitive edge as well. The extensive and intensive use of technology is the new mantra that requires a dedicated preparedness. In the last 2 years, we have more aggressively seen and learned the power of technology and how to work with hybrid models. In this fast-changing scenario with our higher education ever developing and evolving, how are we going to keep our educators and students, our policy planners and decision makers informed and evolved? How we will improve our education system manifolds and sustain it in future? To take us through this journey of makeover, how technology platforms are restructuring our academic programs, we have experts to explain the challenges anticipated and the way forward. So let me move on with the introduction of the panelists for our today's discussion. We have Dr. S.S. Mantha. He is the former chairman of the All India Council for Technical Education. During his 6-year stint, he implemented several e-governance initiatives and facilitated regulations for transparency and accountability. Earlier, a professor of robotics, control theory, and artificial intelligence at Veer Mata Jijabai Technological Institute, he now occupies the emeritus chair there. Dr. Mantha has published nearly 300 papers in national and international journals and at conferences, and also authored 3 books. He was member of the Karnataka Skill Development Authority and advisor to the government of Andhra Pradesh. Presently, he is Chancellor, KL University, and adjunct professor at the National Institute for Advanced Studies, Bangalore. He's also chairman of Technical Committee, National Cyber Safety and Security Standards, and IT expert for the government of Maharashtra. Welcome, Dr. Mantha.
Thank you.
Next, we have Professor Jannat Shah. He is the founding director of IIM Udaipur. Under his stewardship, the institute has become the fastest growing management institute in the country, joining the elite group of 5% of the world's accredited B schools within 8 years of its establishment. Its best ever placement season happened just last month, despite the challenges of the ongoing COVID-19. Prior to joining at Udaipur, Professor Shah was with IIM Bangalore for 2 decades as a faculty in operations management. He's a recipient of several teaching awards, the author of Supply Chain Management, Text and Cares, which is a part of MBA curriculum across business schools in India. Professor Shah has also consulted with multiple companies and designed and developed decision support systems for supply chain management. Professor Shah was a visiting scholar at the Sloan School of Management, MIT, and the Logistic Institute at National University, Singapore. He currently holds the position of Special Professor at Nottingham University. Welcome, Professor Shah.
Thank you.
Mr. Vivek Iyer. He serves as Vice President, Asia Pacific for Anthology, where he is responsible for all aspects of results and revenue, which includes sales, business development, partner management, and account management. He has spent over 20 years in enterprise technology, and the last 6 years, he has been helping institutions across Asia Pacific achieve their goals. His previous experience includes stints at SAP, where he was heading the higher education business for India, Teradata, where he was heading the marketing applications business, and at IBM in various roles. The last one being country manager for DB2 and Informix. Vivek has an MBA from SP Jain and a BTech from REC Kurukshetra. Welcome, Mr. Vivek. Mr. Philip Murray. He is the Regional Vice President, Asia, Blackboard. With more than 20 years of experience behind him, Philip is passionate about how education and technology converge and how innovative technologies can support institutions worldwide to build a better education experience. During the pandemic, he worked with several institutions in India together with their local channel partners to help move teaching and learning online rapidly and efficiently. His core work area is to see how technology can help develop and implement learning strategies to achieve outcomes, such as improved student learning and performance, increased student engagement, faculty efficiencies, and successful mobile learning. So now I'll invite Mr. Philip Murray first to kind of kickstart the discussion with a slide presentation for the audience. I would also request the audience to kind of first listen to all our panelists and keep their questions in reserve. And when we open our question and answer box, please start sending your questions so that by and by we can take them, but please do not interrupt in between. So Mr. Philip's slide we are expecting will show us how his company helps educational institutions and individuals make more informed decisions, better their results, keep life on and off campuses convenient and secure, and much more. So welcome, Mr. Philip Murray, and it's over to you.
Soma, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. Hopefully we can see the slide that I'm presenting. So I just wanted to, first of all, set a bit of a tone for the conversation. Soma, thank you very much for the introduction and, of course, the setting the goals of today's webinar. But there's something else that we also look for too. It's easy for us to talk about some of the technologies that we have, but it's really also gets down to the fundamentals of ICT organizations who come together to look at enhancing and improving the oversight or the goals that we have. And just a few weeks ago, literally it just feels like a few days ago now, our two organizations, Anthology and Blackboard, merged. Now, this was back in really the 25th of October of last year, middle of a pandemic, a very, very challenging time for many people, institutions around the world, not just in India, but of course, right across the world. But the value of ICT and how that would then be applied to help faculty, students, and of course, administrators really came to the forefront. And what it allowed us to do was to look at how do we bring together disparate organizations, but complementary as well. So the merging of Blackboard with Anthology brought together other technologies that Anthology had acquired over the previous few years, including campus labs, campus management, and iModules. And we'll talk a little bit more about those in a moment. But it brought together these complementary technologies. And it really allowed us then to have a much broader conversation, more aligned with what we see is happening, not just in India, with the national education policy. And a number of presenters will talk about that in more detail shortly. But it was really also saying, well, how do we create a more holistic offering, a more robust offering, so that institutions, ministers, and departments of education would then look at this and say, how do you help me with the whole student life cycle? Right from when a student is joining at a kindergarten or perhaps preschool, right the way through to when they graduate, they become an alumni, and of course, even after that, as they continue on with their educational life cycle beyond higher education.
Philip, just want to make sure, I'm not able to see any slides. Are you presenting them?
Oh, yes, I was. Sorry, let me just go back and do that again. I apologize.
Now it's come up.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much just for the clarification. Because it's always a bit challenging when you're on one end of this, you don't get to see yourself, right? So when we view this, of course, the combining of the technologies from Blackboard and Anthology really allows us now to really address some of these critical elements that are happening, not just in India, but right across the world in many different markets. But certainly today's about the national education policy will be a key hot topic, and of course something that everyone's particularly focused on now. And when we look a little bit more at this, you might say, wow, 150 million students every day are using the technologies from Blackboard and Anthology in 80 countries that include literally from kindergarten through to higher education, degree, MBA programs, research institutions, and of course, postgraduate as well. Students going back and creating ongoing teaching and learning capabilities, which again aligns very closely with what the finance minister was talking about in the budget just a few days ago, about the reskilling, upskilling of students, and of course those who have recently left university, to make sure that India continues to provide world-class capabilities. So seeing this as a consistent offering right across the world also provides us a very solid base for continuing our offerings. And again, we see this being talked about repeatedly, this idea of impact on revolutionizing education, the emphasis on utilization and integration of ICT. Now, one of the things that has come up regularly when we talk to clients, we talk to industries, we talk to ministers about this, is of course, how far can ICT go in the delivery of skills transfer and education? Well, we're certainly not here to talk about the role, again, a diminishing role for educators. Being able to utilize technology in an effective way to quickly enable them to create even better content and even better capabilities and easier skills transfer and engagement with students is critical. And I don't think any of us would disagree with the fact that so many people who are involved in education would say that they are incredibly time poor. By the time we mark papers, we assess, we write a course outline, we teach, then of course we have after school activities that we need to support as well. Those requirements are just becoming more and more demanding. So the idea then that we see, how do we actually apply this technology to reduce the amount of repetitive work that's required, but also enhance the quality of the output, which is of course the courses. So many of the institutions here that we work with, not just in India, but right across the world, have really taken that on and become real advocates of this change in saying, how do I minimize or try and reduce the time that our educators need to spend on work which is repetitive and perhaps might be, the value of it might then be looked at and reviewed, versus what is the output? The output is the content. The output is the student success. The output is, of course, how an institution then reviews itself as it comes back and looks over the course of an academic year. So we've just put up a couple of clients just from India here and a few other ones as well, but they have a very similar vision. And the vision is, how do they actually utilize technology, not in an invasive way, but they use it to complement what they're already doing so well, which is, of course, the teaching and learning part of it. Now, my colleague Vivek will, of course, be there to talk a little bit about some of the other technologies that can help behind the scenes to smooth and enhance what is being delivered. And of course, they are critical to this. Whether or not it's admissions and enrollment, whether or not it's engagement and retention, which of course, keeping students engaged, but also keeping them there in school or at the university as well, and finding out if they're having challenges, what are we going to do to help them and identify them and engage proactively, is of course a critical part of it too. But as students leave and they wish to remain engaged through alumni programs too, how do they keep involved in that? And then of course we have all of the other elements, the institutional and learning effectiveness, the student success, while students are at universities or in K-12 schools, how do we help address some of those challenges that they face? Because it is an extremely challenging situation, no more so than the last 2 years. It's certainly something that is not going to really reduce in its challenges for students in the foreseeable future. And then we kind of come to the core elements. How do we kind of hang this all together? Well, there are lots of different products that are available. And of course, they come from many different vendors. But what we've seen over the last few weeks is really bringing together the capabilities of Blackboard with our core solutions like the learning management system, our collaboration tools, allowing institutions like Chandigarh University to run their university online using Collaborate, but still keeping that engagement with students on a daily, hourly basis so that they don't feel as though they're being left on their own. But of course, then seeing how they can improve the quality of content. And then we also see the key technologies that come from anthology. So the course evaluation toolkits, helping faculty build better courses by providing a rich evaluation criteria. Engage. And well, how do we engage more effectively with students? Not just in courses, but in all of their student life, so that they can participate effectively, not just within the faculty, not just within the campus, but obviously for the richer part of a student's life, which is, of course, it might be social clubs, it might be other groups that they're participating in across the campuses. Again, allowing them to do that. And of course, portfolio, which then really allows them to take away the work that they've done and to be able to show potential employers in the future, or of course, should they go on to postgraduate work, showing the quality of the work that they've done and to help them in their applications. So when we look at this, there's a whole life cycle that comes together with the aggregation of these technologies. So all of us like talking about awards, but really the key issue here is how effective have we been in helping institutions, particularly the last 2 years. I don't think there's anybody who would disagree that the last 2 years has been the most challenging, not just for higher education, but for K-12, and really for many of us, even in postgraduate and of course in the business environment. The challenges we've faced have really been enormous. And how do we then align that more effectively with the use of technology so that we can minimize the stress, maximize the output, but of course, ensure that we keep that quality of engagement. We keep that in, keep the ability for us to talk to a real person at the other end of the screen or on the other side of the camera, or of course, when we're just talking face to face, but providing a richer environment. So, Soma, I will hand it back to you for the panelists. But I just wanted to set the tone for what we're discussing, and I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Philip, for that presentation and understanding of how the universities will perhaps need to work in future and how they would look like. So I think I'll start with Dr. Mantha first. Sir, I would like to ask you how you foresee the future in education sector, because as we understand that, say in less than 15 years from now, the new education policy will become more functional and education 4.0 will completely focus on the taught than the teacher. So who do you think essentially would be in the driver's seat to bring about the visible change, especially in higher education? That's what we are discussing today.
Thank you. And good afternoon to all the co-panelists. The national education policy certainly has several pointers to how probably the future of education will shape or will transform into. Yes, I mean, there is a time period also, which is probably they're talking about 15 years from now. The real question is, how does the technology change or evolve in the next 5 years, not just the 15 years that they are talking about. So there is a lot that will happen as the technology changes, as the technology evolves and so on. This is for a very simple reason that increasingly the education delivery mechanisms will be driven by technology and within the universities, within the institutions and so on. So therefore, there must be some way of factoring in the changes that take place within the technology into the policy initiatives. Now, having said that, there are several other things which need to be looked at. First of all, the adoption of the digital infrastructure. Now, we have a very large system, and there are almost 1,000 universities and things like that, 40,000 institutions and so on. So how does one enable all these number of universities and institutions to go and invest in digital infrastructure that's required in future? And how would the transformation take place is probably what is going to define what will actually happen in the next. Is it going to be business as usual, or is it going to transform into something that's much more meaningful? The second point is the national education policy, very rightly, I mean, this should have happened long back. They talk about 50 GER in the next 15 years. Now, 50 GER is not just scaling up the current numbers and multiplying by a factor and saying that so many students need to come into the system and so on. That's maybe too country to a kind of a reply for that kind of problem. There'll be much larger numbers required if one has to really realize that 50 GER. Now, the brick and mortar institutions that you have currently in the country will, there is no way that they can meet that requirement of reaching that GER. Fundamentally because you can't keep building all those infrastructure and so on. And it's too expensive for a very simple reason. And it's not necessary that students will flock to an institution or university just because there is a university there. What must happen is what is interesting within that space. How is the education delivered, and how is that connected to these competency-based skills that people get, and how that translates into some meaningful employment. Now these are the things which will really define, and therefore what will probably get that 50 GER is only a virtual university where you build in a certain amount of, now we are talking of blended learning, which means I'm fully aware that not everything can be done online, but there are certain things which can be done online. There are certain things which need hands-on skills. So you need face-to-face, working through workshops, laboratories, and so on. So even simulations may not work in that space. So therefore, what I personally feel is blended learning will move into mainstreaming the education. And that's where the virtualization will help. A virtual university. I mean, yesterday in the budget, they also mentioned a digital university. So that's certainly a way to go. But there are a lot of infrastructural requirements that have to come in place before anyone talks about the digital universities. It's a very loose understanding that we have today. People talk about distance education in a very expansive manner. And that's not what a digital university is all about. There are skills that are required. There are absolute hands-on skills required. There's a lot of pedagogies which have to change. The content will have to be created which suits that kind of delivery models and so on. So that's one very important area. But the brick and mortar will not do the job. It's only the digital space that will get those numbers that the government is talking about. There are other things within the NEP which will also shape the education that we have tomorrow. The multi-point entry exit that they are talking about. The second, and added to that, is the academic bank of credits. Like a student can accumulate credits and learn at their own pace and come back into the system whenever they want. And things like that, complete flexibility. The whole thing is moving towards student-centric learning, unlike what we had earlier as teachers deciding everything, faculty deciding the curriculum, faculty deciding how they study, when they study. All that will probably give way to a lot of personalized learning. But then these are all good terminologies. And I mean, there is a lot of debate that can happen around this. In order to make them happen, in practice is an extremely difficult proposition. For example, several institutions have to come together, build in their best practices together, bring in their best content together, build digital infrastructure, share content on that. A lot of collaboration will be required in that space if personalized learning has to happen. For example, if somebody wants a course from Delhi universities and the same student wants another course from Jadavpur University, and so on. If that kind of mix and match is required, then probably a lot of regulatory provisions will also have to be tweaked for those things to really happen. Now, then we have a great emphasis is being put on, multidisciplinary research. In fact, if we look at universities which had started, the older universities, like for example, the Mumbai University or Jadavpur or Madras University and so on, they all had all the departments together when they started off. But over a period of time, several departments closed because there was no traction. The students were not coming in, the faculty was not there, funding was not there, and so on. So some of them closed down. Therefore, and even today, the institutions that we have where we have multiple disciplines, or even just in technology, for example, if you have electrical, electronics, mechanical, civil, how many times do they come together and create a project and actually, take that project forward? It's all a lot of good work, a lot of research happens, the best of papers are published, but they are all in very small niche areas that the faculties are experts in. So one of the requirement that the NEP puts on the institutions is that multidisciplinary research must happen, where again a lot of collaboration is required. And collaboration is possible in today's world, as we have seen in the pandemic. A lot of things can happen online, but that's a place where you have to have checks and balances and monitor, and therefore that's where the issue really comes in. Now, one other.
Yeah, Dr. Manath, we'll just come back to this because you raised the issue of pandemic. So we'll again come back to the NEP point. The kind of the pandemic did accelerate a shift in higher education, and it was like a test bed for Education 4.0, transforming the concepts of personalized learning and integrating technology with reality. So I think it would be interesting to hear from you, Professor Jannat Shah, like what exactly was your formula for IIM Udaipur's placement success? It has been really talked about in the media, and what does it really mean? Where do we stand, and how much more groundwork has to be covered?
So thanks, Uma. It's interesting that, if you look at a higher education, especially premier institution, I'll restrict much more to management. Face-to-face learning is what we valued a lot because we do case study and all that. And suddenly, at 2 years back, somebody had asked me a question that, can you do a online learning? Honestly, my answer would have been no, right? But somewhere pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons. So in the past, we used to use a technology. We've been using, learning management systems and all. But honestly, we had not been using in a most optimal way. I think what the pandemic has done has taught us how to learn, how to work in a hybrid kind of environment. So, when we are out of this, suddenly we're going to look at whole thing in a very different way. So we're saying first that not all programs will be done in an identical way. There are some programs which will be a face-to-face intense, but there are some programs where by and large online will dominate. But in all of them, I think there are two elements which, Philip and Dr. Mantha talked about. One is there is a lifelong learning. I think suddenly now we see as an education institution, earlier we used to restrict ourselves for the 2 years when the students are there. Now we're saying we can actually stay connected with them even after they graduate. So that lifelong learning will happen. Second would be to also make sure we are able to do individualized learning, because earlier in a classroom setup, right, you would have 65 students in a classroom and you will pitch somewhere at an average. Now, what technology allows us to do is to actually ensure that different students, there will be some group learning, but there'll be also individualized learning. So I'm very excited by what technology can do for a premier institution like us. But also it throws up a lot of opportunities to help second tier and lower institution. As a premier institution, we're going to probably work with a few students, but we can create a content which is accessible to tier 2 and tier 3 institution. So as a result, we are able to, bridge the gap today, which is there between premier and, second tier institution. So I think there's a huge opportunity, which somewhere pandemic has helped us accelerate that pace. And I think there is a possibility that India can become a hub of a higher education, So I think it's a huge opportunity, increasing GIL, as Dr. Mantha talked about, making, even the premier institution will be able to enhance their quality of learning and bridge the gap between the top schools and the middle schools and make India a hub of a higher education.
Right, points well taken. I would like to bring you and Vivek at this point on your opinion, how would you describe how technology will indeed contribute to the success of the education system, especially in a country like India, where we have digital divide and a lot of existing inequities?
That's for me, Soma.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for having me over. It's really a privilege to be sharing this platform with some luminaries like my co-panelists in this field. I have always been nervous in front of any professor, and there are two of them here. So, you can understand my nervousness. Coming to your question about how technology can contribute to the success of education in India, I feel, and this could come across as a biased opinion, but I feel that it wouldn't be too amiss to say that technology probably will play the most crucial role in education getting to where it wants to get. If you see the trend in education across the world as well as in India, there is an increased and concerted movement towards personalized education, like Dr. Mantha also alluded to. And I must clarify here that when I say personalized education, I don't mean it flippantly in terms of consumeristic personalization or anything. What we mean is now putting the student back in the center of all the learning process as well as the learning journey. The student, after all, as our CEO always says, is the reason why we exist, our raison d'etre. By putting the student at the center, what we mean is that we offer the student the complete flexibility and freedom to choose what they want to study, where they want to study in terms of which institutes, where they want to study in terms of do they want to study at home or in classroom, how they want to study, the pace at which they want to study, everything, all this power is now moving into the hands of the learner. The learner is now able to, or should be able to, increasingly chart his own path of learning success. In fact, there's a good argument to be made that the definition of a learner student itself is changing. Today, a learner can be a traditional student who sits in a classroom, like we all know. It could be a working professional like you and me. I also heard about Professor Shah's comment about lifelong learning, or it could be a teacher, herself or himself, because we're talking, and there's a huge emphasis on teacher training. So with the advent of so much technology and rapidly changing, information, everybody is a learner for life, and this change has been going on for many years steadily. But there are two extraneous factors which have rapidly accelerated the movement towards this. The first one, of course, is the pandemic. Whether we like it or not, institutions have had to keep their lights on, so to speak, and that's why the adoption of technology has been very rapid in that area, whether it is in terms of online delivery mechanisms of learning, synchronous, asynchronous, examination, or proctoring online, so on and so forth. The second extraneous factor is the new national education policy, which is obviously a very grand and ambitious vision. But even in the NEP 2020, you will see that there is a very strong emphasis for personalized education. We're talking about offering choice of multidisciplinary education. We're talking about multiple entry exit. We're talking about online, offline kind of thing. So as you can see, there is a concerted effort towards personalized education. Um, when we are
As you're talking, Vivek,
yeah.
Professor Sarbajit Mukherjee, Professor of International Relations, wants you to address the issue that how the point of digital divide in a country like India will be, kind of taken care of under this.
Yeah, I'll probably weave it into my answer. Those extraneous factors that I talked about, technology is definitely mandatory to operationalize personalized education. But I think the greater role that technology can play is in making that freedom effective. For example, let me give a couple of examples. You take a classroom full of say 30 students. There are going to be various types of learners. There are going to be some faster learners, relatively slower learners, some learners who are, who need that creative way to engage them, to spark that learning, fire. If you have the same content being taught in the same way, same pace to all these students, the faster learners are going to get bored. The slower learners are going to get overwhelmed, and the creative ones are just going to be left uninspired. If you use technology to create learning cohorts, and let the faster, learners a separate pace and path of learning. Similarly, for the other ones, on the whole, the entire class is going to have a much better outcome. Now, the second example that I can think of is a multidisciplinary. We are telling that, we can give the students can have the option of mixing and, matching courses, but that's all well and good. But on what basis do these students decide, what courses to choose? There is very little data that, students can use to make these decisions today. But technology today can actually, give a suggestion that, listen, you have these 6-7 skills or knowledge base areas. If you add these 2 skills, your odds of getting your dream job are going to increase by so and so percentage. We have the technology and the data to predict, these outcomes to that extent. So I would say that technology can not only operationalize, but can also make it more effective. Now, coming to the question by the audience member about technology divide, it is true.
That seems to be the primary concern of everybody, the inequities which we have in India.
It is true. It is true that while on one hand technology has increased access in a lot of areas, but at the same time, that has been more of a privilege for the urban class. If you're talking about online technology, large parts of India are forget about internet. Even electricity is a problem, right? So yes, there is a divide which used to exist. I think technology is reducing that divide, but still there is a long way to go. The way technology tends to evolve, I am sure that we will bring down the barriers of access to education more and more. But yes, I mean we have to acknowledge, in my opinion, that there is definitely a divide, and we have to work more towards bringing down the barriers for equitable access to education.
Right. So I would like to ask Professor Shah, since, I wanted to avoid the budget inputs, but since we are meeting the day after the budget, and how critical do you think it is to foster an ecosystem of research in our universities? Because, even yesterday, the budget mentioned about enhanced funding, given the fact that NEP is going to focus on increasing research opportunities and promoting a strong research culture.
So, I think, if you look at our Indian institutes, one challenge has been, for example, if you look at top 100 institutes in the world, we don't figure in. Essentially, it's because we have not done well in research. So that's where, as you rightly mentioned, research will have to become a cornerstone for institutes. And somewhere, again, I think 2 areas which are going to help us in this. One is the collaboration which you talked about, right? So today, see, earlier what would happen is, if I was sitting in India, I didn't have access to all the global conferences and the global journals. Now we are saying technology makes that available. Second concern used to be that data. Whenever I talk about a research, We also keep talking about industry, academia, alliances. Now, what has happened in industry, mainly in terms of the way industry is moving towards becoming more digital. We're not talking about only digital native companies, but even other companies, traditional companies, are becoming more digital in nature. What it does, it allows us from an institute perspective more access to data, which was not possible earlier. So there is a huge opportunity where research is going to happen in a collaborative way with industry using these digital technologies. So I see technology as a great, again, enabler in improving research, which traditionally has been a weak point for India. So I don't think we have a choice. It's just that this technology and all this movement towards digital, right? So today, for example, if you want to understand a customer, right, and do a research related to customer, I don't have to do only focus groups and those kind of things. Now I have access to way customer has interfaced with a product as well as with the organization in the whole buying process. So we are quite excited about this whole idea that the whole, research ecosystem, which need to go up, the collaboration with industry need to go up, and this digital is going to play a great role in this regard.
So, Dr. Mantha, what would be a very qualitative, notable difference we would see in NEP 2020? And how are we going to kind of effectively monitor this revised education policy, if we just focus on this technology part?
No, basically what happens is in an institution or a university, two things happen. First is a deductive learning, and that happens in the classrooms through, the teacher-student interface and the learning that happens there. So that's essentially the classroom. The second is the experiential learning part, which is the hands-on skills that are required. So therefore, the technology may take care of the first part, the bringing in the distance learning, the methodologies, the online learning, and the tools that are available in that space, measuring the students' performance, measuring the faculty performance. All that can happen through technology. And the teaching that happens within the classroom can be enhanced by the additional value-added content that is available from several sources, and in the private space, in the government space, and so on. But having said that, the experiential part of learning is extremely important, and that happens on the job. So therefore, any education must fundamentally look at not compromising either on the first part, the deductive part, or the experiential part. Now, I believe the second question you said is about the divide. Is that right?
Yeah, and I was asking about how to effectively monitor, like a system like National Education Technology Forum.
Yeah.
As I think mentioned.
There are, yeah. I mean, what really happens here is the National Technology, Education Forum. It has certain objectives, and fundamentally what happens is by NETF in itself, it cannot make things happen. A lot of regulatory space must make it possible for whatever NETF can at most monitor, see that policies are there in place and they are the operational part of it can be provided, but the actual monitoring will have to come from the institutions themselves by identifying the right requirements that are needed for example, in the space of online education, for example, if we want to connect that to the current education requirements of students, the industry is evolving into using a lot of technology and evolving into the industry 4.0 space and so on. Now, when you say that, the education also must follow that, and therefore introduce all those courses which center around cyber physical systems and AI, ML, things like that. But having said that, the education must also reach everyone, and it, like we have been saying before, it must be student-centric and designed towards personalized learning. One report that I would want to mention here is a research done by McKinsey Digital, and they predict that the education revolution, which is driven by the industry requirements, is all centered around cyber-physical systems, and 60% of all occupations could potentially have at least a third of their activities automated. And that in short defines what the education should be, and then how the employment potential change. Even the skills that we acquire today have a shelf life. So therefore, this whole ecosystem must evolve, with one supporting the other. The technology supporting the actual delivery systems, and the actual delivery systems changed to suit the technology that is available. So these are some of the things that are extremely important.
When Mr. Dinesh Kumar is already reacting to what you are saying, and he says that the seeds of education are actually reading, writing, and calculating, and products of education are courage, confidence, and values. So how do you say that technology will assist to generate quality education?
No, technology in itself may not mean anything. I mean, it's a tool that you use in order to facilitate the teaching learning processes. Now, how you use the technology in terms of making a better delivery, identifying the people who within a classroom as to what their aptitudes are and their learning methodologies are, that's where technology is useful. And for example, how there are several experiments being conducted, a lot of research being conducted in terms of identifying what should be the delivery method so that the understanding of a student is the maximum. And they give examples of the gaming industry, like a student hooked onto a game, he keeps on doing that. But if he is given a topic to learn, probably gets off the system in maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and so on. So there are a lot of technological interventions required in order to make the teaching learning process a little better. Technology by itself may not improve things, but it will facilitate the systems.
So Professor Shah, like somebody wants, Mr. Sundar Subramaniam is asking, what is the proven method to show that NEP will actually empower the learner?
So I think so there are several dimensions. One is, once you allow a greater competition and greater variety in the way students and even professionals can learn, that itself is going to put pressure on all of us. Just to give a simple example, if I have a proud online player who's saying, I'm going to give you an MBA degree with 1 lakh, I mean, my student is going to ask me that, why would I pay 20 lakh to you and to be physically in classroom when you want? So I think what is interesting is the way this is putting a pressure on all of us. Similarly, allowing international institutes to come in. So to me, greater competition, having more access to the learner, and to finally putting learner at a center stage is going to put a pressure on all of us, which is going to ensure. So I'm saying it's not one element. It's this whole lot of elements putting together is going to ensure that finally we'll be able to improve the quality of learning and quality of research for a country as a whole.
Right. Philip, a lot of people are asking for your email ID. So I would like to ask you, since you have been associated with the education system in Asia Pacific for a long time now, where do you think, like, how India fares globally? You know what the major concerns are in India. So from your experience, how do you think India fares globally?
Well, I think there are three elements, Summer, when we look at this. One is, of course, how do institutions rank internationally? And again, as Dr. Munter, as well as Professor Shah have spoken about, it's been a challenge because a lot of those industry recognitions come from research. So again, that's always a challenge. How do we change that? But obviously the NEP has some plans to deal with that. But there are two other elements. And I see that each of them really is focused on the support for the student. And my colleague Vivek has spoken a lot about that, what we're doing with the student. But where we've seen a pretty dramatic change is where a government then looks at the quality of the faculties that are teaching. So, we look at the role of a student and we say, oh, we have to digitally enable them. Well, they're already digitally enabled for many of them, regardless of the digital divide. So for many faculty, many teachers who are thrust into a role that they are unfamiliar with, there's very little that's been provided to them other than you have to take your class online, or you have to learn to do these new skills with little in the way of support for them. So where we have seen institutions do well, and a couple of our clients in India really were leading this model, was enabling rapidly and dramatically how they helped faculty prepare for this change. So students are the most flexible you will ever find. We tell them, hey guys, we're going to teach you this way this semester, and they'll grumble a little bit, but they'll go and do it, right? We'll talk to academic leadership. We say, this is a great idea. They'll say, yes, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. We'll try it. But the people who get stuck in the middle are faculty. They get pushed from above. You've got to improve the quality of your teaching, either grading, ranking, or whatever it might be. You get pushed from below because students want to see more technology incorporated. Even if it's not necessarily available to them, they want to have a richer engagement, right? So faculty get kind of squeezed. So what we're seeing, though, is a very real conversation in India now about basically creating almost a digital teaching and learning certificate or certifications. So, again, some of the clients, for example, Chandigarh University, put all of their faculty through a 6-week program to help prepare them at the beginning of 2020, get them ready, because a lot of the time it's unfair to say, you've got to create what you might have taught in the last 10 years or 20 years, face-to-face. It's not the same when you need to move it online, and helping them with that curriculum. But we do see that there's a lot of conversations in India now, and it's been ongoing for the last 2 years, about how do we help enable, enrich, and support faculty, because obviously courses are only as good as the faculty member that leads them. So, we see that as being a key driver, and certainly something that India has really taken on board. Now, whether or not that is a national platform, I'm not really too sure. I can't really comment on that. I'll leave that to my colleagues on the call to discuss that in more detail. But
right, because there's already a lot of skepticism about, everybody understands that digital mode of learning is surely the future, but whether we are ready for this change. Vivek, maybe if you could highlight, like your company is a very dominant player in the field and also offering possible solutions to the student, right from the stage of enrollment all the way to its alumni management. So how do you think this comprehensive offering would be of value addition for any university? If you could cite some specific examples, it would help them to understand better also.
Oh, absolutely. There are, like you said, we empower universities and institutes to manage their entire student life cycle, right from pre-admission to, right till they become an alumni. Also, we also help institutions run their operations more effectively in terms of managing their administrative tasks like finance, HR, and payroll. Now with the merger with Blackboard, we also are able to manage the teaching and learning part of it online. So to speak, you can almost run your entire university using anthology technologies. Just to put it, wall to wall, you can run an anthology university. Now, why is it important to have such a integrated platform? Today we see that in India, we are sort of a chaotic country, right? Our systems, because of the way they've grown, we've sort of built different systems. I'm talking only about IT systems, technology systems. So you have institutes which have grown very rapidly, but their technology has not evolved that rapidly. So they've sort of the technology has grown but not evolved, and that's why you find every area like admission, exam, etc. It's in silos. When it is in silos, you are not able to get a 360-degree view of a student, of a faculty, of a course, or of how your institute is doing. When you have this integrated platform that Anthology has, you are able to run meaningful analytics, analysis, and that can lead to better decision making, not only for the institute, but you can also start intervention mechanisms to students. You can you can red flag students who are probably not doing that well, and there is no point in telling the student after the final exam that you've not done well. Well, it's too late by that time. During the course, if you're able to get these red flags in a timely manner, course correct the student, that is where technology can play a great role. Not only in identifying these red flags, but also intervening with the right intervention at the right time. This leads to better learning outcomes for the student, obviously, for the faculty, for the institute, and overall the entire progress of the education system.
Professor Shah, somebody wants you to highlight a little more on the hybrid models of foreign universities, which you also mentioned. And also they want to know that, like when in a real world classroom, there is a group discussion or there is interpersonal dynamics which works, that kind of an environment exists. But in online learning model, what will be the outcome? Like it's so different.
Yeah, so I think today you're absolutely right. There are parts of face-to-face learning which we will not be able to implement. But I think there are a lot of other new ideas which we can bring in. So overall experience we can make sure remains comparable, if not better. For example, your ability to have a polls in between, right? So every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you can check that are you able to, students are engaged with you. You're able to, so a lot of, and depending on what level student is, he or she might be able to look at different set of assignments, right? So suddenly all this, which was not possible earlier, you're able to do it. Similarly, today's technology does allow you to do a smaller group discussion within a class. So I have a 90-minute class, but within that 20 minutes, I can do a smaller, divide them into smaller groups, do a group discussion. I can get even industry leader coming and interacting with our students. So I think there are parts which are missing, which is because you have eye-to-eye contact with everybody, including, you're able to ensure that nobody switches a video off, right? Which is a reality in online. But I think there are a whole lot of those technologies which make sure that you can have an effective learning even in an online part. Most of the things you're able to take care is just you have to train the faculty accordingly, which Vivek talked about and Philip talked about. Now coming to the international, I'm not too sure about the exact nature of question, but I think in general, the greater collaboration, earlier, if I had to do a collaboration, I would have a physically movement of a student. We talk about a student spending 1 or 2 trimester outside, right? Now, to learn a culture, probably you will still have to do that. But today you can still form a group which can have a multiple universities or a multidisciplinary. For example, if you're talking about a product design, you can get a business school as well as technology student coming together. So I think technology will allow you to do multidisciplinary groups which can work on outcomes. Similarly, multi-country thing. So I think immense possibilities are there, but still, for example, if you want to understand a culture of different country, maybe students will have to go and physically spend time. So again, hybrid mode is going to work much better rather than just pure, physical or a pure online.
Dr. Mantha, since the shift or the focus on technology is also shifting the focus on a self-learning era. So participants want to know that how will you ensure the validity of evaluation in this kind of education?
There are several aspects to that question. In fact, one must understand that there are technologies available today to validate the student whose performance is being evaluated online, and there are any number of technologies available for that today. Now, having said that, evaluation is one part of the story. The more important part is how do you learn, how do you make sure that the outcomes that are there for a particular concept are actually delivered. Now that's the important point in a learning process, in a teaching learning process. Now here what most of the people on an online learning mode do is they break the entire learning into smaller elements. In fact, maybe 10 minutes, and conceptually taking people along as the skill level grows and so on. So most of the content is in very small pieces, and each piece will be followed by a set of questions which basically makes you understand whether the student is on course on the learning curve. So having said that, there is a what I'm trying to get at is there is a continuous learning that is happening, and the continuous learning outcomes are evaluated, and not so much as having an exam at the end of the semester or end of the year, which probably will not tell the evaluator as to what exactly has the student learned. So the idea is to actually get away from those year-end exams and year-end semester-end exams and substitute that with a kind of continuous learning methodology, which has much better outcomes built for a student. So and the technology to take care of the like for example today, if you look at the way we operate the online education, most of it is whatever the teachers were doing in the classroom, they have started doing that on a Zoom like platform. So the examinations are also similar, and for bandwidth issues they in fact go and tell the student that you switch off the video, you switch off the audio and things like that. So therefore there is absolutely no connect as to what is happening on the other side. Now, and there is one more thing that happens within a classroom, in an eye-to-eye contact, there is an emotional connect that happens between the teacher and the student, and there's a great learning that happens in that process. Now, one possibly cannot replicate all that on an online medium, but in future, probably in the next 5 years, I believe, the AR, VR devices will take over a lot of that learning part, and therefore seamlessly building that into the technology based teaching learning process will probably have some answers, but then there are technologies to exactly evaluate a student's performance, keep his validity, keep his, I mean, there are all kinds of scans which can be done while a student is taking an exam and things like that. So I don't think that's really the problem. But when you want to expand this on a scale that we are talking about in this country, then probably there will be challenges which will have to be sorted out.
Yeah, so in this context, when we talk about higher education, participants want to know, we are looking at UG, PG or PhD, especially the PhD students. For them, how is the scenario going to change? Because they say that we publish a lot of papers, but they are never kind of either cleared or implemented. So they want to know what will be the reality for them, like the PhDs in
For
particular.
me,
Yeah, either you or Professor,
yeah.
anybody can take.
So I'll see,
Both of you can add your inputs.
yeah, the real issue of a PhD in this country begins, I mean, for any place for that matter, it begins with the defining the problem. You know, once the problem is properly defined, then you set the the process evolves over a period of time. But today, what is really happening is the guide or the faculty who handholds the student for a PhD work, they would have worked in a certain area, and probably that's the only area that they want to expand within that space. So students are predisposed, even before they start off any work on that. Now that, therefore, definition of a problem is extremely important, and it must connect some. There is a question that is usually asked while a research is conducted: what is new? So therefore, this is a problem that seldom talked about within the institutions, within the universities, and so on. So therefore, it's very necessary, first of all, to define the problem and then set the goals which are required over a period of time. Now, publishing papers, unfortunately, has become a kind of has to be done kind of thing within the universities and so on. So the university is insisting that unless two papers or three papers in international journals are done, your PhD will not be, you will not be able to submit that. These kind of restrictions have actually, made the research work a little, redundant in that sense. People are only interested in submitting those papers. They are not bothered about, there are several journals there. I mean, there are some very good journals and very good conferences which people attend, but many a times it is the paid journals and things like that which operate in the system and make life easier for the faculty or the people who are doing research, but it doesn't add anything in value in terms of the research that is conducted. So therefore, it's very necessary that the faculty who handholds is very well informed and sets the problem right, and also creates some kind of synergy between the experimentation that follows. In fact, most of the research projects today, if you see, they are mostly theoretical. They are based on certain assumptions, and they are carried out to meet certain requirements. There's hardly any experimentation. There is theoretical research, there's statistical research, there's empirical research. There's so many different kinds. There is even anecdotal research. So people get into these easier things in order to fulfill the conditions that are imposed by a university, and therefore the quality of research doesn't actually come out. And one final thing is, when these problems are created, why can't the faculty discuss, at least 2-3 different departments come together, discuss a problem, and then create subtopics for the students to work on? Thereby you will be amalgamating all this knowledge that you are creating into creating something that is useful. Today there is no productization in this country. That is because a whole lot of stress is on publishing papers, not on creating something that will go to create a product. So therefore, this whole idea must change. It should begin from the user end side. Create your identify the problems and then work research backwards, rather than identifying a problem first and working forward. So that's.
Professor Shah, would you like to?
Yeah. So there are two parts. One is the challenge in PhD is usually cohort size is smaller. In no individual institution, as Dr. Mantha had said, knowledge about all the comprehensive tools and methodology. So again, by using, combining those in a blended form, So today, for example, across IIMs, you could talk about certain PhD level courses which are offered to all the students. So with a result, you're able to pull this expertise across, so you're able to get certain economy of scale as well as best from both worlds. So that's one part through which we can improve the quality of PhD. Second, which I talked earlier, is access to data. The digital has certainly made data relatively easier than the past. So Dr. Mantha talked about earlier, most people used to do a theoretical work because I didn't have access to data. Now today, because of digital, right, you will have, government makes you available data easily. The corporate would make data available easily. So those who want to do really good research, I think the possibilities are now going to be immense. But some of the problem which Dr. Mantha would remain if the students are not interested and if the faculty is not interested, there's very little you can do just from a regulation perspective.
Right. So I think we've crossed more than 110 questions, and a lot of people are repeating the same thing, that this is all about digital divide, and we will be further creating these barriers between tech, non-tech, rich, poor, rural, urban. So keeping that in mind, either Philip or Vivek, would you like to answer, comment on what would be the cost of education in this new paradigm? I mean, is making higher education, is technology making higher education more affordable, or unaffordable luxury for people?
Yeah, go ahead, Philip.
All right, you go right ahead, please. You've got the insight in India. So.
Okay. No, I had alluded to this when I was speaking that there is no doubt that there is definitely a digital divide. We have to acknowledge that. Just because we are in the business of technology, we can't wash away our hands with that. It is an imperative now. Going forward, that is the way it's going to be. We have to figure out ways in which even using technology, how do we democratize it? How do we make it more accessible for everybody? And India, if you take our country's track record, we've always leapfrogged, stages of revolution. For example, the landline, we completely almost leapfrogged it. We, went from pre-landline to straight away mobile technology. Internet also, we leapfrogged because, we had so much of catching up to do. Similarly, I anticipate that, there is going to be a leapfrogging of, sort of stages of evolution here, where we are very soon going to reach a stage where, it's going to be far more accessible even to, rural areas. And now how and in what shape and form we're going to do, obviously there are more answers than questions, but, we tend to find answers for this, as we evolve. And I'm sure with the emphasis of government on, all these policies that are in place, pretty sure we're going to reach there very soon. I think we're in the right direction.
No, the question is more about, how the cost of education will be worked out on this new mode.
Yes. So with this, the digital divide is also, primarily because of cost of education. Not everybody is able to afford the ways to access education. Now here we need to make a distinction between cost of education and cost of access to education. Okay, cost of education is, I think with more and more sources freely available, I think cost of education actually goes down. Cost of knowledge goes down, cost of acquiring knowledge. But the cost of accessing education, as we push it more and more online, definitely there are barriers to acquiring the devices and the media through which education can be accessed. So I would say that cost of access to education has gone up, especially for the slightly underprivileged sections. For the privileged sections, obviously it has it's been easier, but the cost of actually education is probably coming down, is what I would say. And with more and more technology evolving, I think even the access to education, like I said, we figure out ways to make it more democratic in our country.
Yeah, like we all want access to technology. At the same time, we don't want to turn into tech robots. So Varghese wants to know, is there some way where we can educate our new generation learners in autonomous subjects, like what we are talking about, this lifelong learning, where they actually do not require to increase their screen time while we talk about tech education? I don't know who would like to answer that.
So I would just share our own experience.
Right.
So when we moved to online, the first complaint we got was the screen time. So what we did, we thought students would love the material in an electronic form. But what we've been shipping is actually books to student home. So because total screen time, so I think we will figure this out in terms of combination of how do we do this in an effective way. So as we said, we send the material now in a physical form, but do classes online, right? So I think you're absolutely right. We'll have to figure out a way in which we work optimal way, because you don't want to go to other extreme where, all the time on the screen, because it's going to create different kind of challenges. So I think, like Vivek, I'm optimist. We have a way of figuring this out. There are challenges, but I'm sure we'll figure it out in a way that overall, right, there'll be bumpy ride, but overall we'll be better off in a time to come.
Very simple question. Science is not easy on digital media. Learning science is not easy on digital media.
AR, VR, as you talked about, I think a lot of things are going to change. You're absolutely right. Earlier, the first wave, what you're doing, where we were just, whatever was in a printed form, we just tried to put it in a PDF format, right? But now using technology, I'm sure it's going to possible to do a whole lot of experimentation, which was not earlier. So again, some of this is going to take a little time. But if you take a slightly longer horizon, that's why I like the title Vision 2035, right? If you take a longer horizon, I'm sure we're going to figure all this out.
Mm-hmm. What about the non-traditional learning subjects, like vocational? A lot of people talk about liberal arts or humanities. So there is a little doubt about how do we go about that. Actually, which are the most friendly subjects on to be learned online, and which are the tough ones? And how do we merge, or how do we bridge the gap? Vivek, Dr. Mantha.
For example, the courses, I'll restrict myself to management. Within management, we find courses like business statistics and all that are much easier to do, using technology, because it actually allows you to do personalized learning, right? But when you're teaching courses like organizational behavior, where you want people to interact with each other, the technology, you would use a mix of technology to achieve that. So there is obviously a range where, there for some courses which easier, but again, I'm quite sure we would have a way of figuring some of these issues as we go along.
Vivek or Philip, would you like to add to this? Because you're doing a little bit of hand holding here.
Yeah. No, I think that when we look at this, it's also very much reliant on the faculty lead about how is something taught. And I remember when I went to university, and then also when I also taught at university as well, I was told to teach how I was taught. And I remember going along, and this is perhaps showing my age somewhat, I wanted to use PowerPoint to talk in a lecture theatre and not use an overhead projector, for those of us that are old enough to know what an overhead projector looked like, right? And I remember as a, teaching a 101 course in psychology, that it was something that the faculty lead would come along, well, how are you going to teach it? I said, well, we're going to use some of the technology to allow us to perhaps introduce some new concepts as well. Now, I know that's going back quite a way, but that sort of change was also driven by the creativeness of the faculty lead, by wanting to say that there must be a way to do this. These are not insurmountable problems. These are problems that we can address because you've got highly creative people, you have lots of technology available, but you have an overriding commitment, which is improve the quality of the outcome. And if we look at a course and we say the outcome of this course was worse than it was before, then we're doing something wrong. So we need to go back and have a look at it. Now, I remember, and we get to see this often, we would go along and talk to a university or a school, and they would say, how do we teach science? And you say, okay, maybe there's some ways that your faculty have got some really cool ideas about how to do some stuff, but they've never been given that opportunity, again, to show it. And there's one particular example that we have, and we were asked by a school, how can I possibly teach how to use a microscope in an online course? And we gave it back to our solution engineers, and they mulled around with that thing and talked to their colleagues and friends, and they came back and they did a webinar for us, which is how for school students to build a microscope out of stuff you can buy from, or what you might have around the house. So it allowed us to do two things. One was go back to fundamental principles of what we're trying to teach, which was, again, light waves, magnification. And it also was something that was really creative because kids were able to use it almost as a craft class to run around the house and say, Dad, I need some cardboard. Dad, can I get something? Dad, I need, or Mum, can you help me with this? And it became a craft class. And then it allowed us then to show how do we teach these, some of these fundamentals, which are pretty hard. If you look at them and say, how do we teach the issue of light waves? How do we teach the issue of magnification? How do we teach the issue of optics in a class where I don't have a really expensive microscope in front of me? Well, let's go back to the first principles of what we're trying to teach here, because we don't need the expensive equipment, we need the fundamental principle. And I think when we go back and we look at the ways that we're teaching science, it allows us to really freshen that up, because a lot of the time we've jumped a lot of steps. And it gives the faculty, it gives the leader, it gives the, in many cases, the teaching assistant, the opportunity to be creative in how they're trying to teach it. Because we don't have to cover every single thing in the chapter. That's not necessary. You create an opportunity to talk about the fundamentals. And again, going back to what Dr. Munter and Professor Shah was saying, we go back and we look at this hybrid model. The hybrid model is not necessarily to teach from a book. It's unnecessary. We provide technology and allow students to integrate and use that and absorb that information to then come to a class, whether or not it's a collaborate session or a Zoom class or face-to-face, to then go through how you actually can apply that knowledge now, not teach that knowledge in the class. I've done that. I've used technology to learn that fundamental. Then I can come to the class and apply it. And that's where we see the real value of this hybrid. And it's allowing people to have these creative opportunities to talk about it. And in many cases, get students involved as well. They become class projects. Hey, how do you think we could teach this particular issue? How do you think we could teach this first principle? Guys, I need you to go off, work in your groups or whatever you might do. Come back tomorrow and let's talk about some ways that we could do it. That's the teaching element.
Yeah, actually, there are a lot of these concern over, again, going back to urban-rural divide and courses which need hands-on experience. So somebody's again asking, like, what about the engineering colleges located in rural areas? How would they really benefit?
Well, I'll leave that to my other esteemed presenters to discuss that topic. But just going back to it to say, you know, how do we view the fundamentals? What are we trying to teach in these ones? Will there be requirements for us to have face-to-face? Of course there will be. The value that we provide as a faculty lead or whatever it might be is critical to help refine, remove the rough edges, help clarify and direct. But where we also see there's a lot of work that needs to go in as just informational exchange. How to write formulas, how to do this. This is some pretty basic stuff. So again, it allows us to do that, but I'll hand that question back.
No, Professor Shah and Dr. Mannat, you know, a lot of people again are saying that when we are focusing so much on the student and self-learning, so do we really need so many teachers? And would teachers now, can we do away with B.Ed degrees? And third part is like, if the supply chain of the gig economy is not properly regulated in the country, then how do you expect the supply chain of teacher to student, it will be fruitfully carried out in this current digital infrastructure that we are discussing?
So I'll just take one part, and Dr.
Yeah.
Mantha is more competent to talk about the regulation part. But I think the fact that today, even in rural area, I have access to a professor from one of the best university. I think to me that is a great advantage, which I didn't have earlier. Earlier, geography would limit me, because quality of teachers would be very poor, right? So today I'm saying just allowing that access is going to change. I know, the digital divide issues will be there, but the fact that today we are given this access, which was not possible earlier, I think is a huge advantage. I think the challenges which you're talking about on the regulation front, Dr. Mantha is the expert on that.
Dr. Mantha? Yeah.
You're on mute, Dr. Mantha.
It's not so much as regulation. There are a few things which we must really understand in this space. Digital divide is something that we cannot wish away. It's there. There are, about 10 minutes back, I had an internet breakdown, and I live in Mumbai. So there is these kind of things will continue to happen. And expecting that in a remote place in India, you will have all the time, you will have a connectivity, not just connectivity. I mean, there are also people who do not have the devices at all. I mean, they do not have this access to smartphones, they don't have access to PCs, and so on. So how do we solve those kind of issues? There alternatives must be explored, and there are several alternatives available. The content which is created is online, and it's a recorded version. Now, it's quite possible that a certain time is allotted within the cable TV network, and made available to people at other times, not online, but at other times which they can view and make use of that. So, and there are also low-cost devices which somebody, maybe the CSR, maybe the government, they can come together and provide these small, which have limited facilities of viewing and so on. So therefore, there are methods available. And then there are also mobile systems where you can actually fit in the entire digital infrastructure and carry the van to the villages rather than bringing the students from villages to the classrooms. So and then people, the government also can come in and use certain spectrums which are available, which are extremely useful for transmission without interruption and things like that. There are solutions available to address digital divide. That's the first part. The second part is the teachers. Now, as far as we are looking at a system where even today, fundamentally, we believe, and I believe every regulator believes, that the best form of teaching is a classroom teaching, where there is a teacher in front of you and you interact with them. The teacher has some means of knowing what is happening within the classroom. That's the best way to do things. But in a system which is expanding, where we need to provide for several multiples of the numbers that we have in the classrooms today, then the only solution is technology. I don't think any teacher will become redundant, or teachers will be asked to go away because there is a lot of tech. In fact, the whole paradigm of teaching learning must change, must evolve when we are talking of online education. I'll give you a small example here. When we teach, let's say we are teaching online, maybe using some platform that's available to us. What do? There is a chat box, and maybe some students are interested, they type in something. The teacher may see it, teacher may not see it, and then the effective time is gone, and that's how the whole story ends. Now, what should actually happen is the content should be created where there are at least two people, two experts of the same subject operating together, and one taking care of the actual teaching learning process, and the other one, the answering the queries that come in and act as a support system. Now, if both these people come together, you have a different pedagogy that is evolving. So over a period of time, these things may happen. but it needs, if I assume that that will be a model, I will also believe that there are going to be more requirement for teachers, more requirement for experts, and so on. No technology has ever displaced people from that space. What has happened is the skill sets that are required have to be redefined, relearned, and so on. So the teachers must be willing to extend that little bit, gain additional skills, new level of skills, and then come back into the system with the knowledge that they have gained otherwise.
Right. So I think I have to wind up now. So I'll just wrap up with one quick intervention from Vivek. Lalita wants to know that this online teaching is going to be the future, and the foundation needs to be laid at the school level. So why do we always keep talking about higher education, and why doesn't your company work with schools?
Well, with there are two parts to our company. Now with Blackboard coming in, we also have a lot of work that we can do with schools. Traditionally, before the merger, Anthology's products were specifically designed for higher education. So to that extent, she's right. But with Blackboard now, we have the solution, the technology that we can take to even schools, and that's going to be on an ongoing basis is going to be a focus area for us going forward. There are already a couple of large chain schools that we are speaking to on how they can adopt this technology. So increasingly, you'll see a lot of work which is happening from our side in the school area as well. It's a huge, obviously a huge potential, in that sector, which we will start focusing on.
Right. So I think we have around 150 unanswered questions.
Only.
And if they're directed to any specific panelists, we will forward them to you. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our panelists for this invigorating session. And I'm certain that all those who joined us today for this edition of the Hindu Education Plus webinar, they have plenty of takeaways. And so I would really like to thank all of you for sparing your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Fantastic.
Thank you, Philip.
Thank you. Thank you.